Today on the channel we're going to talk about new Canon cameras that are rumored to be announced this month. Rumors, I know, but these are actually looking quite interesting, and if you haven't heard about these, let me enlighten you. There will be two new cinema cameras, and these will not be your typical C-line Canon cinema cameras that we are used to, but these are going to be a much smaller and spec-down versions of the Canon C200 as well as the C300 Mark III. And the biggest difference, they're going to feature an RF mount for the first time. And I think these cameras could be quite interesting. So in this video, I will be talking about what I think these cameras will be, what I hope they will be, and what they need to be in order for me to maybe even ditch my newly acquired Canon C300 Mark III and replace them by this new Canon C70. So let's talk about more of this after the intro. According to all the rumors that are read, there's going to be two cameras like I've already said, and the first one that's going to be announced is the smaller version of the C300 Mark III, which on one hand I think is kind of weird because the C200 hasn't had an update in quite a long time and the C300 Mark III is completely new. But then on the other hand, looking at all other Canon cameras, they always start with the bigger, more expensive models like the C500 first, then the C300, or the R5 and then the R6 later. So in that regard it does make sense, but we'll have to see. But the camera I will be focusing on today is that camera that is going to be rumored to be a smaller version of the Canon C300 Mark III. So this baby cinema camera from Canon is rumored to have a C300 Mark III sensor. Pretty much exactly the same sensor. It also features internal ND filters up to 10 stops and up to 4K at 120 frames. It's rumored to be priced around $6,500, and that is almost half the price of the Canon C300 Mark III. And it will also feature an RF mount. So now there's actually the argument to be made, who will buy a C300 Mark III with the EF mount if you can get a C70 or whatever it will be called with the same sensor up to 120 frames in the smaller form factor with an RF mount at half the price. And in this video I will talk about what the differences will probably be and why this new camera is way cheaper than the Canon C300 Mark III is. We've seen the images, and like I've already said in the beginning, this looks more like a Blackmagic Pocket 6K instead of a full-fledged cinema camera. And I think this design is quite curious, and we've only seen the front and we haven't seen the back. So we don't know if there's going to be a large screen on the back or lots of inputs. But let me tell you what I think, what this camera will have and what it doesn't. The biggest difference here is that yes, it features a 4K 10-bit 422 codec internally, but it won't be RAW. So the big question here is, what other codec will this be? Because it's also rumored that it will record onto SD cards instead of CF Express cards. And that is quite curious because all the other Canon cameras out right now, like the C500, the C300 Mark III, the 1DX Mark III as well as the R5 also shoot 10-bit 422 4K, but none of these cameras actually is capable of recording this to SD cards. So that makes me wonder, what kind of codec will this actually be? And looking at all other Canon cameras, there's only two other codecs this could be. This is the H.265 codec that is implemented in the R5, as well as the XF-AVC codec that is implemented in the C300 Mark III. And I think the latter actually makes more sense because again, it's a C300 Mark III sensor, and this would actually be quite the cool codec because I do like the XF-AVC codec that is implemented in the C300 Mark III. And if this codec would feature the H.265 codec of the R5, I think this would be a huge fail for Canon because I've already talked about this in my video about the Canon R5 and why it might not be a good video camera. And even right now the first tests are out of the new iMac that has 10 cores and is still not capable of just playing back the new R5 files. So if you have a dedicated cinema cameras with a codec that is definitely not editable as of right now, and quite frankly, H.265 is a deliverable codec and is not a recording codec, and it probably never will be. So this would be a really weird choice for a cinema camera to have. But if it would indeed feature a XFAVC codec, which I think is a really good compromise between RAW and the H.265, I would be curious about the bit rates, because again, at the current bit rates that the R5, the 1DX Mark III, the C300 Mark III and all the other cameras offer, it won't be possible to record to SD cards. But maybe this is part of the rumors that just isn't true, and I think this is probably the most unlikely rumor out there right now. The next biggest difference is going to be the body, and this is not going to be a full-fledged cinema camera body and more of a hybrid between a DSLR and a cinema camera. And that has to come with some compromises. And first, it will definitely not have the same input options that the C300 Mark III has. I highly doubt that this camera will actually have two full-sized XLR inputs, if it does have any XLR full-sized at all. It might feature a mini XLR like the Blackmagic Pocket 6K, or maybe one full-sized XLR input, but we'll have to see. The next thing that is also rumored is that this camera won't have an SDI out. So looking at the C300 Mark III, where we have HDMI, SDI and a monitor out, as well as the internal video out, you have so many different options, and if you really want to rig this camera out on big productions, you have all these options, as well as SDI being more secure. So again, for a really fully blown out production, the C70 might not be the best choice. Also, looking at all the extension options of the C300 and the C500 bodies, where it is fully modular and you can hook up V-mount batteries and have extension units and a lot of Ethernet capabilities, the C70 will probably have none of this, and this will be quite harder to rig out and make a big production camera than a C300 or C500. The next and the last biggest difference is obviously the mount, and this will be the first cinema camera that actually features an RF mount, and I for one am pretty excited about, because we already have some RF glass and the new RF lenses are amazing, and I wish my C300 Mark III had the same RF glass, but unfortunately it just doesn't. And as of right now, I'm kind of in the decision process if I'm going to sell my RF lenses and go EF only, because when traveling I don't want to have two sets of lenses, as amazing as the RF lens lineup is. But with a camera like the C70, I might actually fully commit to just having RF glass and switching to it completely. There will probably a lot of other differences that the C70 has to their bigger brother, the C300 Mark III. I doubt the C70 will have anamorphic support, and there will also be other smaller differences that are more catered to a really specific target audience of high production people. And a lot of people like YouTube content creators or smaller one-man band filmmakers won't need all these high production value options that a C300 Mark III offers. And that is exactly the target audience of the C70. I think it's a lot of one-man band shooters, independent filmmakers, YouTube content creators that don't need the raw capabilities, that do not want to rig the camera up on a really big production shoot, that don't need anamorphic support and don't need all the highest quality audio solutions. And I think as a kind of hybrid between a DSLR and a fully fledged cinema camera, without the stills option, I think this is actually a great camera for a lot of content creators out there that don't want to spend $12,000 or even $17,000 on a C500 Mark II and instead just want to spend $6,500 for a really great sensor and an amazing camera that the C70 could be. So if all these rumors are true and the camera is actually what I think it will be, will I make the switch back from the C300 Mark III to the newly rumored C70? Maybe, and we'll have to see what this camera is actually capable of. Could I go without the RAW option? I probably can, because the RAW in the Canon C300 Mark III is not that much different from the XFAVC codec. I will be missing the SDI out, but I think the RF mount might actually be worth it for me to have a smaller body with the RF mount, which makes it so much easier for traveling. But overall, we will have to see what other drawbacks the C70 will have over the C300 Mark III, and I will update you if there's any more information out there in the future. So subscribe to the channel if you want to see more about this. But I'm for one very excited about the new lineup that is coming out with the C70 and whatever its smaller brother, the C200 version, will be. And I hope you liked this video, and tell me in the comments if you're excited about these cameras and what other differences you think the C300 Mark III will have compared to the C70. And that's pretty much it for now. And starting next week, there will be the bigger videos, the bigger reviews. I will also do the review of the C300 on the Crane 3S and lots of other bigger videos to come. So again, subscribe if you haven't already. And I hope to see you on the next one.